He might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so, but you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We are delighted to once again be joined by writer-director Carter Smith. We're talking about his new film, Swallowed. And Carter, so excited to have you back.
Yes. Yeah, it's good to be back.
And bringing in the queer horror again, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that's, that's my sweet spot. That's where I long to live as much as possible.
I mean, us too. So we're right there with you.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't the brand. Well,
Exactly.
okay. Yeah, you seem to be directing a lot now because you did The Ruins back in 2008, and you had Jamie Marcus Dead, Midnight Kiss, but now you're like, it seems like you're really kind of starting to churn out the films. What is bringing? What spurred this return to this passion return for filmmaking for you?
Well, I mean, this particular film was all about, like, after spending a lot of time sort of developing stuff and kind of going down the road of developing stuff with either big stuff or smaller stuff, and sort of dealing with trying to attach cast and bring in financiers and the sort of traditional route, which just oftentimes doesn't go as you want it to, and it's never quite as easy or as effortless as it you hope it's going to be. And so this Swallowed particularly was just about, like, writing something from the beginning that I knew that I would be able to make with the resources and the friends and the crew members and the people that I had available to me, like, that we would be able to do it whether we got a big name star or investment or not. And so that was, and it's and in a lot of ways that's kind of how I thought my first movie would be post Bug Crush, like that it would be like this sort of micro budget indie weird queer horror thing, and it didn't end up happening that way. So I've sort of like flipped the trajectory that a lot of people sort of has become the expected trajectory. But there's something super liberating about sort of taking control and making the film that you want to make and not having to wait for permission and not having to have it be contingent on casting or on tax incentives or all the stuff that kind of goes into making films.
Right. You just get to make the movie that you want to make.
Yeah. And it's not it's not easy. I mean, but no film of any scale is really ever easy.
Right.
What?
And the movie that I shot right afterwards, that was it's a Blumhouse project, and I had done Midnight Kiss with them, and so it was a lot of the same team involved. So that was very much like working with familiar collaborators and people that I'd sort of worked on stuff with before.
Nice.
They just happened to stack up right one after the other.
Yeah, but two very different filming experiences, just given the types of like the business side of things.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned Bug Crush. We previously talked to you when you were doing the anniversary screening out of Sundance earlier this year. We're obviously huge fans of that short. And then you've also done your photo series, All the Dead Boys, which is technically Swallowed is a All the Dead Boys production. We're wondering, because gentle spoiler alert, this film is set within the world of Bug Crush and it has a similar visual aesthetic to All the Dead Boys. How did the short and that photo series sort of feed into the creation of this film? And like, how do you see them interacting or speaking to each other?
Yeah, well, I mean, All the Dead Boys was, something that I created when I got a little bit like tired of shooting fashion and celebrity stuff, and I wanted to make some images that were more fun and more personal and more interesting and darker, and so I kind of returned to this idea of doing stuff that was that was personal work, and that it was stuff that I was doing for myself, and it was there wasn't any client and there wasn't any publicists, or there weren't any sort of parameters that I was working within, and sort of kind of getting to play around with the aesthetic of, you know, where the creepy and the sexy kind of meet. And so by, you know, by having, you know, by creating Swallowed like as an All the Dead Boys film, I guess it just, for me, it just meant that like it was the kind of thing that it was gonna happen without other people having to get on board.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like it just sort of symbolized this idea that, you know, I'm going to make a piece of work that is personal and that is something that I want to make and that is not, you know, going through test audiences and you know, things like that. So that's the All the Dead Boys of it all. And also Jose Colon, who plays Dom in Swallowed, is someone that I photographed for All the Dead Boys.
Okay.
And that's where I first met him. And it was after meeting him that I, you know, like I was editing the pictures and I was starting to play around with the idea of the script. And like a lot of times when I shoot for All the Dead Boys, like I, you know, each of those guys is a character. And Jose's character, like his name was Dom for some reason. Like that's the name that I came up with for him. And then all of a sudden, Dom, like I realized that he might work at a, you know, a backwoods Maine, you know, auto repair shop, and that maybe his best friend was in love with it. Like, and so it kind of, it very much started from a photo set that, you know, that we had done for All the Dead Boys. And, you know, I shot Bug Crush in Maine. And, you know, with a crew of people that, you know, I'd been working with, and that, you know, and that was very much another film that was made without, you know, thinking that much about like who was going to see it or who was going to appeal to. It was, you know, I think I told you guys before that I kind of figured that, you know, 15 people might see it and like it, and, you know, that would be okay because it was exactly the kind of movie that I, you know, wanted to make.
Right.
And so it felt fitting to go back to Maine and back to like small town Maine, you know, to this world where, you know, it's, you know, 15, 14, however many years later. And, you know, there's, you know, the bugs from Bug Crush are, you know, haven't gone away.
It's fascinating to us, I think, in part because we've started to do more work with queer horror shorts, and a lot of the time Trace and I will like review them and be like, so would we want to watch a feature version of this? Like that's usually how we end the episode. And what would it look like? And it's really it's still a bit of a novelty to see a horror short get turned into a feature film, but like I don't think we ever would have speculated with Bug Crush this is what it could look like, because in some ways it's exactly what you would think, and in some ways it's like completely outside of the box.
Yeah, I mean the only thing that you know, I mean there's certain things that it has in common, but like other than the fact that, you know, I'm sort of behind the you know, the depravity of it all. Like, you know, I mean, it's because you know, if I'd wanted to turn Bug Crush into a feature after, you know, Sundance back then, it would have been like the, you know, there was no shortage of people that wanted that to happen.
Right.
But at the time I kind of felt like, okay, like this is like I was really happy with the short, and I felt like, okay, this is a short, and this is a really good short, and I'm really proud of it as it is, and I don't want to, you know,
just leave it alone,
stretch it out, and leave it alone, let it be.
So that's why you chose for the, because I feel like it's very rare when we do see shorts adapted into a feature length that it's a shared universe type thing instead of we're expanding this story. So is that why for Swallowed you chose to do that instead of just kind of use some of the same characters?
Yeah, it was definitely a shared universe. It's like the same, you know, I liked the idea that, you know, it's the same backwoods community, it's the same world, and, you know, the bugs from Bug Crush are still around, and, you know, thinking you know, from a story perspective, the idea of monetizing them, you know, is you know, a logical step that could happen over, you know, especially, you know, when you know what their effect is.
Right. I mean, and this is a silly like subversion, not the one you think I'm going to say, but like, because I live in Texas and I keep hearing, oh, we're going to cross the border. And I was like, this isn't Mexico. So I love that we're doing a
There's
US
more than one border, Trace.
I know. But like,
sometimes he forgets.
You never see the Canadian border used in films, especially ones about drug trafficking, right?
Yeah. Well, you like if it had been a windier day on the day we shot the border crossing scene, you would have seen the Canadian flag at least. But
There we go.
we didn't have wind and we didn't have money for a wind machine. So
Really, Carter,
Got
you
it.
couldn't even been given us Canadians that little
it was there.
nod.
We got a Canadian flag. We did get a Canadian flag.
Oh my god, do you want him to like sing like the Canadian anthem like while this flag is like waving in the wind?
Yes, obviously.
Oh my god. Well, okay, so it is no secret, at least to us, and hopefully people that, have read about this film, this is a very, very queer film. Why was this important to you to make a film that was this unabashedly queer?
I don't know that it was. I mean, obviously, it is the film. It's the film that I wrote, and it's the film that I wanted to make.
Mhm.
But it was never the intention to be like, this is going to be the queerest of queer horror movie. Like,
Mhm.
I started with a story about Dom and his best friend who is in love with him, and this kind of night of awful shit that happens
Right.
over the course of one night, and it just kind of became I think that that's my default if I'm in storytelling and writing mode, like an over the top, like close to losing it villain in the Mark Patton rich vein
Mhm.
is way more interesting to me than the sort of straight counterpart. You know what I mean? And I think that there's something interesting about the idea that an antagonist like that is preying on our characters in like in a way that we wouldn't normally get in horror films. Like that's not a dynamic that really exists.
I mean, Patton's role in and of itself is already a subversion of that type of like character trope, because again, you would typically expect this kind of big, butch, tough, masculine man, and you've presented us a somewhat effeminate queer villain who is still threatening.
Yeah, because I mean, as for the character of Benjamin and Dom, like that, that type, like who Mark's character, Rich, like that's threatening. That's like someone who is going to take advantage of you and going to like manipulate you, and like that's its own special kind of threatening. And that's like another element that I love the idea of playing with, because I wrote the part for Mark after seeing Scream Queen, and so I love the idea that it was a different type of representation, I guess.
When writing it for Mark, so had you already reached out to him before you started writing it, or did you write it and then hope that he would say yes?
Like I usually when I write, I'm usually like, I've got someone in mind, whether they're a long shot or completely
unattainable.
Completely unattainable. Yeah. But I saw the doc and I was like, that's kind of an interesting, like, I'm a little afraid of him. Like, and or just, I wouldn't want him on my, I wouldn't want him to be
on your bad side.
Yeah, no. Look, we did a recording a live recording with Mark Patton when that documentary screened at Fantastic Fest, and we were definitely like, we came in with like kind of, let's like joke and have fun, and as soon as he comes in, he's like, we're not gonna do this. And so it was an interesting, it's somewhat intimidating, but like I respect it. It's like, you spent, after you've seen the documentary, like you see, why he's like that.
Yeah, and I think that special brand of intimidating is something that I haven't seen on screen before, really, and especially in a horror film. And so I wrote it with him, like sort of as my archetype, and then I just messaged him on Instagram. That's how I found him. Like,
it's just that easy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but he didn't quite believe that I really, like, there was a little bit of hurdles to jump through to make him understand, like, yes, I really am a director, and I really did write this for you, and I'm actually going to make it, and I would love for you to come be in it. Like, that took a little bit of
finessing.
But yeah.
So when you actually get him on set, we read in a couple of different places that his lines were at least partially improvised. Like this, it seems like maybe he was doing more of his own thing than some of the other actors on screen. How did you negotiate between what you were looking for from the performance and the character of Rich, and what Mark was willing to give you as someone who is very steadfast?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because kind of across the board with all of them, the script was there, and the script was very much like a blueprint, and it, obviously there's certain information that we needed to get across to have people understand what the story is. But like, I mean, especially when I'm the writer, like I'm not that attached to specific lines of dialogue, or I mean, I would prefer that actors have the freedom to find the words that feel right and coming out of their mouths. And I would have never, come up with "you done dick teased the wrong queen, bitch." Like that was,
that's the line.
That's that was not me, and I would not have written that. So, I'm glad that he had that freedom.
So do you find it more collaborative then with not just him, but all your actors when you're working on this? And maybe a slightly more financial question, though, is like working with whatever budget you had, which I have to assume was relatively small. I don't know, how many takes do you take when you're like, hey, like shoot the shit, let's try a couple different takes, and we'll see what line we want to use the most?
Yeah, well, we just ran through scenes, until we had it. I mean, the good thing about shooting the way that we did, which was, with a bare bones, minimal crew, in remote northern Maine, where we didn't have internet, we didn't have cell phone reception, we didn't have flushing toilets. Like, so there was not a lot of distraction. Like the camp that we were shooting at for the second half of the film was like 7 miles down a logging road, like a gated logging road that was and the paved road was 45 minutes to the nearest town. So we were really remote. And one of the things about working in a place like that is that everyone is there and they're focused on what you're doing, and there's not no one is off in the corner checking their emails or like doing a quick putting themselves on tape for another role. Like it was people were present. And we shot in a we used a lot of daylight, and we weren't doing a lot of crazy lighting setups, so it wasn't like we were so long between takes and setups where it was like, oh, we want to shoot over here, great, let's shoot over there, and then we're going to turn around and shoot this way. Like we had the freedom to shoot like that by design, because I knew that we would be working with a small crew and kind of on a pretty tight schedule.
Right. So one of the technical aspects that people have, I don't think, like, I'll confess, I didn't consciously notice it until Trace brought it to my attention.
I did.
But you're shooting with a smaller aspect ratio than a lot of conventional films. And we're wondering, can you walk us through why you opted to make that creative choice and what effect you think it has in the finished result?
Yeah, I mean, so we shot 4:3, which is, a little less square than square. And I knew that it was a story that I wanted to tell in a lot of I knew I'd be in close-ups for a lot of the film. And I think that I mean, one, a face in 4:3 fills the frame so much more beautifully than something really widescreen where you've got like 1/3 of the screen with a face and then 2/3 that are like empty. You know what I mean? Like there's like this way that a face, a close-up, fills the 4:3 frame. But also I kind of liked the idea that they are trapped. There is a claustrophobia element to what's happening both in the story, like in the inner story and in the sort of outer story at the cabin. Like they're in the middle of nowhere in the woods, but like they are trapped there, and they there's something very claustrophobic about 4:3. And then the third reason was just like that, when you don't have that extra screen to fill with props or things that need to be lit, or it just becomes incrementally less complicated. Yeah, exactly. And I knew that, like, because that cabin where we shot is a cabin that my dad built when I was in like junior high, I think. So I've been forced to go there many times, and like I knew that room really well, and I knew that it wasn't like a widescreen room.
Right.
if that makes sense.
This will not look good in a particular aspect ratio.
I mean, it's a square wooden room, you know.
You
I mean,
gotta, you gotta use what
it's
you
lovely,
got,
and it worked
right?
perfectly. But yeah, exactly. That's, you know, you use what you got. That was the entire,
You
plan behind this.
you need to have it on as an Airbnb now once the movie comes out, because you can probably make a pretty penny from people staying in it as the Swallowed Cabin.
Perhaps, I don't know. My parents still haven't seen it. I think they'll be traumatized.
They'll be like, no.
Right? It's like, it doesn't look like that at all in normal life. Like, it's so
Right.
like cutesy camp cottagey. Like,
Aw.
it does not look like a backwoods drug dealer den.
Mom, Dad, you're gonna love what I did with the cabin.
Yeah.
So going back to just kind of the queer factor of this, I know you said this is the film you wanted to make. You know, it was really everything you wanted to do. But I guess during this process, was there anyone, or you don't have to name them obviously, but like, was there any feedback or concerns that it wouldn't resonate quite with mainstream or even just generally straight audiences?
No, because I think that everybody who read it connected with the heart of the, like the center of the movie, the relationship between Dom and Benjamin, I think. But that said, we did not, we went out to so many different people to try to get financing, and all, there were so many of them. We're like, oh, we love it, and we like this about it, and we like this about it, and we love that it's so unabashedly queer, and like, but for us right now, but they would never,
Right.
it's never 100% clear why someone's passing or why someone's not investing. And maybe that has, something to do with it, but no one ever said that. I mean, the response to the script and the storytelling and the characters was always really positive. But it was also, I don't think that I ever thought that it was necessarily be a film that needed to open on 10,000 screens.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I imagined it more as like a midnight movie that was gonna play, in Gaytown, like, at midnights, every weekend in October. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of like a more fun, for me, that was the way that I was thinking about it.
It's refreshing, honestly. Like, I'm assuming for you as a creator too, you don't have to worry about like what the ROI, the return on investment, is going to be for you.
Yeah. Well, and if you keep the investment small enough, then it can make sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these two leads. So you mentioned how you developed a relationship with our Dom, and then in terms of like Cooper Koch, how did you find him? How did you help these two to sort of prepare for these really significant roles? Because these are our leads in the film.
Yeah. And I mean, and Jose had never done a film before. Like, this was his first film.
Oh, I'm surprised by that, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not, because I find him very naturalistic. I'm like,
he is
it's almost refreshingly vanity free.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
But that's why I'm surprised, though, because he is really good in it. Like, he doesn't look like a first time. He doesn't come across as a first time actor in that film.
Yeah, well, he's done theater and he's done some, but this is his first like film role. Cooper was someone that I had met a couple of years ago for the first time, just like briefly, like because we were messaging each other on Instagram, and like we met up for like a coffee, and I'm friends with his agent, and so he put himself on tape for the role. And just from the very first time that I saw that tape, it was like, that is 100% Benjamin, and I already knew him. I'd already, like, even if we only, had a coffee together, like I had a sense of what he was like. And, I mean, they sort of, went off, and I scheduled a bunch of time for them to go and sort of do best friend type stuff, because the idea was that they were, had been friends since childhood. So they spent a lot of time, like, everyone came to Maine. They came, 8, 9, 10 days early, and we cooked all of our meals together, and we did, it was very much like movie camp. And, they got to be good friends.
So when we get to the dicks of it all, because there is a lot of male full frontal nudity in this movie. I guess, okay, again, was that important to you to include in this film? And also, how, I don't know, what's a polite way to say, how was it, like, how does that go, like with working with full frontal male nudity, like with your actors?
I mean, I think that it was there from the beginning. It was, I mean, with Dom's character, I mean, with both characters, I mean, actually in the early drafts, even the final drafts of the script, like Benjamin, you know, after he takes that bath, his pants never go back on for the rest of the movie. You know, I mean, but no, his underwear never goes on either.
Yeah.
Like in the original script, he was naked from the waist down the whole time. And I purposely left that script like that when it was going out, so that any actor that was like, oh, I don't want to do that, it would be very clear. Right. Oh, you know, he's still naked, and it's 15, 20 pages later.
But wait, do you specify in the script though your penis will be on screen, or is it just like, oh, you're naked from the waist down, but like, you know, it may not be on camera?
I tried to make it I made it very clear that it would be, you know, and not knowing exactly how it was going to be shot, but knowing that I wanted to make sure that actors are comfortable with it, because I mean, at the end of the day, that's what the most important thing is making sure that they're comfortable and they feel safe and, you know, kind of you know, able to do their job, and they're not worrying about like standing in a specific way, you know, or like whatever it is. So yeah, they were both fully like understood from the beginning what was on the page is what we would be shooting, right? And they were on board.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was going to ask this. So I think just Trace and I are almost struggling with this because it still feels quietly revolutionary. Like, yes, the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, so we're getting a little bit of dick. It's like it's a bit of an amusing thing because, of course, the effects of the drugs are giving him a hard on. So you're like,
that,
yeah.
But then we get, you know, when we get to Benjamin, it's an entirely different thing. And Trace and I, in our sort of longer review of the film, we debated about, like, is it a turn on? Does it make us uncomfortable? Is he vulnerable? Is it funny? And it's like, it's a really complex way to use male nudity.
Yeah. Well, that was very much like, that was by design. You know, it wasn't, you know, I think that I mean, in queer films especially, there's a lot of like, you know,
here's a salacious dick so we can get the festival audiences in.
You know, yeah, there's a lot of that. And this is, you know, I mean, I think that I was pretty consciously trying to put the audience in Rich's perspective. Right. And like, you know, Rich, who is like, you know, forcing this poor kid to strip and parade around this place, you know, that like, I like the idea that as an audience, you're made to feel a little dirty, you know, by sort of enjoying what this horrible person is doing to this guy that we've come to kind of fall in love with over the course of the first half of the film, hopefully.
Right.
Well, but even showing an erect penis, I mean, like, so, because obviously I think it's safe to say we don't have to worry about this going to theaters. You're worrying about the MPAA and that kind of stuff, so you don't have to worry about that. But I remember, like, I think it was Forgetting Sarah Marshall's the first time like a big mainstream film with full frontal male nudity came out. And well, at least that made waves, I guess. But I remember Jason Segel always saying, like, oh yeah, we couldn't have it be erect, but I didn't want it to be like shrinkage. So I would like stroke myself before each take to give it like a little bit of girth, but like not to where I was fully, but like the amount of thought that goes into that. And so again, I'm surprised and happy that we are seeing not just dick in this movie, but erections in this movie. Because again, that to me feels very taboo.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the whole, you know, the idea that, I mean, especially in horror movies, that it's not, you know, I mean, we all grew up on movies with topless girls. Oh yeah, you know, like, you know, and it's been done, and you know, great. And you know, as a kid and as an adult, I'm interested in something different.
Why? Because I do think, I mean, it always does seem like, yeah, like penises are so much worse, quote unquote. Than boobs or vagina. And I've never really understood why that was. And I also do feel like male actors generally are more reluctant to do that because I don't know, size issues, like insecurities.
Depends on the actor.
Yeah.
Right.
You're giving us like this eyebrow, and I'm like, I want to like probe that, but I will not do that on camera.
It all comes down to how confident or comfortable they are. You know, and that's not necessarily anything to do with size. It's more to do with like, you know, how, you know, just how comfortable.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we're going to get full frontal dick from actors in all of your future work, so we can just look forward to that. Kyle Gallner.
Perhaps.
I'm waiting for Kyle Gallner.
maybe not that one.
I was gonna say, I feel like Jason Blum would say no, but yeah,
perhaps.
Let's talk about the fourth actor that we haven't talked about, because obviously this is a reunion of Jenna Malone. Alice is a fucking great character.
Love
Won't
her.
lie, I'm a little disappointed we don't get more of her, but tell us about how is it different working with an actress that you have like a really great relationship with, that you've worked with in the past, compared to people who are either new to acting or somebody that you were like, hey, I like you and I respect you, but we've never really interacted. So
Yeah, well, it was great. I mean, it was, again, I wrote the part kind of with her in mind, not knowing if she would do it. I mean, we've stayed friends after the ruins, and I see her, on a fairly regular basis, on and off, over the years. And so I wrote it with her in mind, and there's something that was really interesting about like, especially watching, her and Jose in scenes together, because like someone who understands, this is my mark, that's where the light is, this is here, like, and then someone who's like kind of taking it all in on the fly, like it makes for like a really interesting and kind of spontaneous way of shooting, which was really fun. And I think that there was also a certain because we were such a small crew, and because we were such a sort of tightly, I mean, we all stayed in like a bear hunting camp together, like in bunk beds, like 6 to a room. Like it was not a traditional shoot at all, but like that kind of family element, helped everyone feel safe and kind of in the process of creating the scenes, because we sort of knew that it would be, a lot of the scenes are really tricky, like they're it's intimate stuff. And Jenna specifically was really great at sort of constantly like checking in on people, are you okay,
like mama bear.
Do you need a little mama bearish, and then of course, and she has the most experience with guns on set, and so she was very much like, okay, loaded weapon, like the whole spiel that you do. So it was interesting, to have someone that has been on, has grown up on sets, and alongside people that it was their first time on set. And so it made it did make a really nice balance.
Did you have any, I mean, I'm going to default assume the answer is no, but I'm still going to ask the question. Did you have any apprehensions about casting her in this role? Because, I mean, one of the big things that we, like when we watched the film, we latched onto, like, this feels like a really unconventional role for her. Like, we feel like we haven't seen Jenna Malone deliver a performance like this before. Was that part of why you were like excited to bring her into this?
I mean, that, and the fact that, I mean, honestly, she's just so talented.
Yeah.
Like, she can sell, anything on screen, and she can make it subtle and nuanced and complicated and different than what you thought. And
like what I loved about her performance, it was very nuanced. I like, because I feel like there's moral gray areas with her character, because again, you're never really sure what side of things she's on until further into the film. But at the same time, while I felt that, I was never like, I never disliked the character. I always, I was like, oh, I like her, even though I don't know if she's a good guy or a bad guy yet.
Yeah, because she has, because she is charming and she's charismatic and she's all the things that a backwoods drug runner probably needs to be, know? And originally the idea, like if you remember in Bug Crush, there was the main character, he had this friend, this girl, who was kind of a tough chick. And the idea was like, if this, if she kind of grew up and sort of blossomed into this world, like what might that look like?
Right. Oh, interesting.
And it's and with Jenna especially, it's an interesting mix, because there's the the Alice, the character is so tough, but her voice is so Jenna's voice is so melodic and kind of soft in a way.
Right.
It was an interesting contrast.
So, okay, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, because I think that once Patton enters the film, I do think that there is a shift in tone a bit. It feels like the film gets...
review.
I feel like it gets a little bit campier. in the second half of the film. And I'm curious to know if that was something that you struggled with, or were consciously thinking about when you were filming and editing even.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much, it was something that I was completely like, once Rich enters the film, like that, by design, everything shifts. And the biggest threat is maybe no longer what they've swallowed. It becomes this unhinged, unpredictable, crazy, queer, backwoods bandit, that is perhaps the biggest source of you know danger. I don't like
yeah.
Conflict.
I don't know. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, but then it also kind of moves into this world where he's preying upon Benjamin and Dom in a very different way.
Right.
And that it's no longer just about the physicality of it. It's also about this idea that Benjamin has to, he actually does have the capacity to get out of this situation if he wants to, by using what works with this character, sort of what he's got. But it was very, it was meant to take a sharp left turn at that point for sure. And I mean, the exact character of Rich, wasn't fully formed until Mark was there and we were shooting. But I kind of like the idea that the tables are turned, and the movie that you're expecting is going to unfold is actually not what happens, and it kind of goes someplace unexpected.
So did you worry at all that you might lose people who were like, oh, I'm really liking the dread and the anxiety, and the sort of like fixed time, like we need to get this stuff handled? Do you worry that you maybe lose some of those people in the shift to the lighter, campier, different tone?
I don't know. I mean, I would argue that it doesn't necessarily get lighter.
Yeah.
There's still, things continue to get worse after Rich shows up. It's more about adding another level and layer of threat and sort of there's more. There are more ways in which Benjamin and Dom can become victims after Rich arrives than there were before.
And there are still many elements in play, because in the first half, it really is okay. Like Dom is like dying, so we need to do something about this. And once he exits the film, and once Jenna Malone exits the film, we still have a kind of a ticking clock on Ben, because he's still got one inside him. But it does become more so you think the bugs are the bad things. No, it's this human. But I also think it's interesting that you have, it's a predatory gay man who's going after this young, attractive man. But I do like that you tie it into almost this generational gap between queer men, or queer people in general, right? Where it's like with Patton even himself, because I think you do tie in a lot of Patton's personal history with Rich himself, of growing up gay in the 80s, I missed out on so many things because I wasn't allowed to be open and free, versus someone like Ben who has a very different experience.
Yeah.
And that plays into this kind of like making this man a villain. But even with that, sorry, I know I'm like going on about this, but like I
find it processing. He's working through it.
No, because again, it's like, what do we always talk about, Joe, when it comes to queer villains? Because again, like when it comes to problematic portrayals, I find that a lot of times we get more bothered when it's like, oh, I don't like it when they're evil because they are queer. I will say that aspect doesn't bother me in this film. I actually like that, because this rings true to me. I mean, I'm a child of the 90s and 2000s, so I had a lot more abilities to be open about myself than someone in the 70s or 80s did. But even I look at Gen Z and I'm like, shit, like I missed out on so many things from my youth because of this.
Well, and also I think that there's like, what young gay hasn't encountered someone with shades of Rich, in their youth. And so I think that that's something that, like, whether or not someone was on board with, the character, I felt like it was something that people could relate to in terms of being either taken advantage of or preyed upon, or, that felt like something that was interesting to explore.
But I feel like that's something that queer viewers are going to pick up on more and maybe understand and relate to more than straight viewers, because I do think, I don't know, maybe you disagree, that I feel like some people might be like, oh, it's just another like queer predatory gay man, like blah. But again, I'm like, but I understand, I'm not excusing his behavior, obviously, but I understand why Rich is the way he is.
Yeah, well, and I think that there are certain people that are probably have never run into anyone like Rich and won't understand, why he is the way he is. But I think that, the three of us and probably a lot of the audience for this film, they do know people that have things in common with Rich, and that they do see the humanity of it, and that it's not like a sort of one note villain that's playing for the back of the house and just being campy to be campy. That like actually people like that do, they do good things, they do bad things, they they do things on all shades of gray in terms of the morality meter. And I think we probably know that more than a lot of straight audiences that might encounter it.
Well, it's an interesting commentary too on like the commodification of queerness, right? Like there's a lot about bodies and bodies being bought and sold, particularly in Benjamin's chosen line of work. And then of course the situations he ends up finding himself in here. So it's a bit of a like sly, subversive kind of, hey, and also flesh for sale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, he's moving to LA to be a porn star. Like, there's no subtlety in that.
Actually, no, and that I think is actually a really, really good touch, because I mean, films that I'm happy we're seeing more films that are normalizing sex work. I think a film like Cam is something that is really, really important. And while Ben's porn career isn't like front and center in this film, I still think it's really important that we have a character like this who is shown as very sympathetic and who is shown as being very, for lack of a better term, quote unquote, normal, right?
Yeah.
Like for him, it's a job. He's like, cool, I'm going to go out here to do this job. It happens to involve doing sex. That's
and he may or may not be like, I mean, who's to say that he's, emotionally okay with it? Like he's taking an opportunity, that it's being offered to him, and, using what he's got to make the most of that opportunity.
So since we've already spoiled something, the brand spoilers already, do you want to talk about the fisting scene a little bit?
Sure. What do you want to know? What do you want to know?
Well, okay, so how did you prepare everybody for that? I mean, like, I feel like there wasn't like an intimacy coordinator on set for this, right?
No.
Which is kind of surprising, right? Because we watch things like Euphoria, which seem to have depictions of graphic sex with quote unquote underage actors. Obviously not, but something like this, it's so much more visceral, and I think it's going to be incredibly confronting to a lot of people who are just like, I'm sorry, what is happening? Oh my god. Okay.
Yeah. Well, from the beginning, from the earliest sort of script stages, I was like, okay, no, I started with the story of this, one friend in love with his straight best friend. I was like, okay, what's the most horrific, intimate situation that I can put them in? And like that was kind of the most disturbing idea that I had. And I mean, it's a scene that goes on for
a while,
15, 20 minutes, like a long time. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how we were going to shoot it, what we were going to see, what we weren't going to see. I sort of knew from the beginning that it wasn't going to be graphic, and that it would be more interesting to see what was happening in close up on their faces,
right?
And to hear what was going on, more than see a lot of the details. But yeah, I mean, we spent a lot, there was a lot of figuring out like what,
how much to show,
how much to show. And I mean, but also like I knew that, I didn't want to actually show fists going into body. Yeah. Like I knew that was not, what was going to be on screen. So like once that's out of the way, it becomes, it becomes a lot easier, if that makes sense.
I can't recall, was there any Foley work done on the sound of,
I
don't know. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's like layers and layers and layers of sound design going on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just I find it so fascinating because Trace and I will often talk about sort of violence that has sexual connotations to it being almost like sex acts. And when I was watching the film, I definitely felt like, in a way, this is kind of like them having sex, but it's in the worst kind of situation,
Possible
right?
way.
Like they're not
It's not
necessarily
sexy.
enjoying it. It's not necessarily sexy, but there is that intimacy that we've been wanting from their relationship since the start of the film.
Yeah, it's like a weird fucked up wish fulfillment, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I
and
wanted this, but not in this way.
exactly. Yeah, which I think is kind of interesting. You know, it put Benjamin in a really interesting place. You know, and you know, the fact that Dom is high and horny, and you know, it's even more complicated.
Yeah.
Is there a
But
reason why you resisted making Dom just an out queer man? Like, did you want to play with this idea of like sometimes queer men fall in love with their best friends and vice versa,
fluid
but it's like
sexuality.
never, yeah.
I mean that was definitely part of it. But also like it also just came from, you know, meeting Jose and knowing him, and you know, so the character was very much based on him and being kind of super queer friendly but straight, but like, you know, so like in a way it grew out of his personality in a lot of ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
I think like sexual fluidity is still a relatively new concept to a lot of people. And so, yeah, I can see my parents watching this and being like, that doesn't make any sense. He's straight. And I'm like, yeah, but no, it's not. It's not that simple.
Well, and I liked the idea that he could be, that, you know, the love that he felt for Benjamin was just as valid and just as complicated as, you know, the love that Benjamin feels for him. You know, different, but you know, related and the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I mean, we're super guilty of this. Like we do a lot of readings, like queer readings of films where there maybe isn't one, but I think it's because we're still so eager to see ourselves represented on screen. But there's something to be said about the power of male friendships that aren't necessarily sexual, or they don't come to a sexual conclusion.
Yeah. That doesn't have to be the end game always.
Dom is a true ally. Like poster child
for
being an ally.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Was there ever an opportunity for us to see more of what happens to Alice, or was that a budgetary constraint?
Her final scene.
So we hear her
when
get shot off
when she's
screen.
Arguing with Rich.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we don't really see the byproduct. Like we see her dead.
Yeah,
later.
that was 100%, like that was crafted that way because I liked the idea that we're in the cabin with Benjamin and Dom at that point, and Dom is while that is happening, you know, there's things are about as worse as they're gonna be for Benjamin and Dom, and so that's sort of happening as Benjamin is dealing with all this other shit.
I guess there's a risk too of like, if we cut outside to see what happens, it's cutting down on the tension of being with Ben and Dom in that moment.
Yeah, and I mean we shot that stuff, you know, a little bit of it, but like it felt like it felt more sort of emotionally centered to stay with Benjamin and Dom as opposed to, you know, because we don't need to know what they're arguing about at that point. I feel like, you know, and I like the idea that you know, Benjamin hears a gunshot go off and he doesn't really know what that means, and neither do we.
Yeah. I think ultimately at the end of the day, I'm just kind of like, I just want to see more Jenna Malone.
You just want more Jenna.
Yeah. Please take that as a note. In the future, we'd like to see more Jenna Malone.
Yeah. Well, we shot everything we shot ended up in the film. There's nothing that you know we shot that we didn't end up using.
Okay. Do we have anything else about the film, Joe, that we want to talk about?
No, I mean, honestly, I'm excited for more people to find it and discover it. I think, I just think it's so confrontational and like subversive. Like we're trying not to hype it.
Maybe.
Yeah. Like we're trying not to overhype it for people who haven't been able to check it out yet. But there's something to be said for like pushing queer horror forward. And like, you know, we talked to a couple of our colleagues and it's like, you're seeing things on screen here that you just have never seen before. And to be able to say that in 2022, 2023 is like shocking.
I mean, yeah.
And I love that I mean, because part of me felt like, in the editing room, I was like, oh damn, I wish we'd like gone further. Like I wish we had like I wish there were, and it's a lesson for next time, because it's even there's even been a couple of times that people have been like, they got through that sort of tough middle sequence fisting kind of moment, and we're like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. And I was like, really? Okay, good.
I think that's always the thing, especially with horror fans, where it's like, because sometimes it's not what you don't see, right? Because what you imagine is happening is mostly going to be worse than what's actually happening. But for a lot of horror fans, they're like, no, but I want to see what's happening, because I need that, like, there's effects to see
visceral,
those effects.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, but this is, as much as anything, this is a thriller as much as it is. I mean, it's easy to say that it's a horror film, but it's, I mean, for me, like, it's not, there's nothing supernatural happening here. This is all reality based and 100% possible.
I mean, I've gotten so used, I mean, it's not unlike using the term queer as an umbrella term. I've just gotten so used to saying it's a genre film, because I'm so tired of having the horror. Is it horror? Is it thriller? Is it
psychological? Is it fuck?
Yeah, well, then people come in with expectations, and then when things take a sharp turn in the third act, they're they're not getting what they're expecting, and so they're sort of miffed by that, which it's for me, it's more interesting to to play around with that stuff and not create a tidy little box.
Yeah. Well, okay, so because will there be more film, or do you have plans to set more films that are set in or connected to All the Dead Boys?
Yeah, I mean, now that I know, how to make a film like this in this way, I would love to make more. I mean, I think that, like, this was very much like figuring out, like, what the practicality is and what the sort of, what it takes and what's possible. And what's achievable and what is challenging, and what's, like, now that I know some of the answers to those questions, like, I'll definitely do it again.
I mean, I'm actually like, because I've seen your photography on All the Dead Boys, and I always think that each one of your models has like a story based on where their wounds are coming from, and so I'm always like, oh, like, what's that person's story? So again, not to feed you ideas, but it's just like
no, they all do have stories. Like, that's part of, that's definitely part of what makes it fun, is the stories that I'm coming up with, behind the scenes. There's a bar called Suckers that if you've seen the short film Sucker, that a lot of these boys work at, and it's it's probably, I mean, it's probably more of a series than a standalone film, but like, it's very much tied to the boys of Suckers. I mean, there's lots of different stories.
How much are these contingent on being able to find like external financiers? Like, you've got a site and you put a couple of your shorts up there. Like, is it possible for you to be financially solvent enough to do some of this work yourself, or does it always have to be like, we have to find a distributor, we have to find investors, and so on?
So how much money do you have, is what we're asking.
I mean, it's more like, when can we expect it? And
do you have any financiers you want to put me in touch with?
I'm Canadian, my money is no good to you. It's worth so much.
Canada. We can shoot it in Canada. I mean, I think the thing is, like, the idea of this way of creating and of storytelling is that it is, a way that does not require the traditional amount of financing and crew and production, and so ideally, it's a repeatable, I think that as long as you're smart about, or as long as I focus on staying smart about the actual the stories that I want to tell within those confines, and not try to make something bigger than it needs to be, or that kind of works within that framework, then I think it's totally repeatable and doable.
So obviously we've spent this past hour talking about Swallowed, but you've hint to the fact that you've already shot, you've got another film in the can. Is there anything you can tell us about that film in these early stages?
It stars Kyle Gallner and Johnny Birchtold. You know that.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of coming of age hostage road trip thriller with blood.
And can we assume it's also going to be queer, or is it Blumhouse levels of queer?
Oh my god, the shade.
It's not as queer as Swallowed, for sure. But it is not any less queer than I wanted it to be.
That's
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair.
Dodgy, but we'll take it.
It's probably queerer than anybody thought, you know, in a lot of ways.
It's queerer than The Ruins.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll leave it at that and look forward to the new project whenever we get to lay eyes on it. But Carter, thank you again for good.
No, sorry. I was thinking, like, let's talk about what festivals this is going to come at, but if we're going to release it afterwards, it doesn't matter. So never mind.
Yeah. Okay, so let me take that again.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll look forward to seeing that whenever it comes out. But Carter, thank you for taking the time to chat with us once again. Always looking forward to whatever new things you've got coming out. And if people wanted to connect with you on social media, is there a way for them to do so?
Yeah, I mean, allthedeadboys.com is the easiest place, or on Instagram, which is the place where I hang out the most.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, take care, and we will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.